Jesi milostivi čovekoljubi Bog i tebi slavu uznosimo, Otcu i Sinu i Svetome Duhu, sada i u vekove vekova.
In a world of shadows and secrets untold, where primeval stories make the brave go cold, mighty gods on high and realms below, whispers of legends that shape each soul. And nightmarish dreams, cryptids lurking, nothing's as it seems. Giants walking, angels and demons fight. Only truth can bring the light. Through the echoes of time, the tales unfold. Mysteries arise as the prophecies are foretold. From valiant knights to buried treasure, this podcast brings nothing but pleasure. Welcome to myth, mysteries and majesty. Study with us, and don't be a travesty. Theology, mythology, fantasy and horror. From dungeons and dragons to Skyrim and Mordor. The powers haunt the evening in gothic castles where they're screaming. Wizards cast spells in their towers tonight, exploiting enigmas hidden from our sight. Archaeologists make excavations deep of the ancient tombs where pharaohs sleep. In the dust of ages we chronicles keep, storytelling's power of monsters that creep. Mysteries and majesty is the place for you to learn about this haunted space. From scholarship to manuscripts of old, unlock the secrets of wisdom and gold.
Welcome to episode 205. I'm sad that you couldn't see Amber dancing in the studio while the intro song was going on. So for tonight, we're welcoming back Amber on the podcast. And surprise, surprise, in a couple of weeks, we'll have her back when we'll be talking about this very interesting topic of the gap theory found in Genesis 1. But for tonight, we have this true story of the machine gun preacher. And this is an inspirational story of the preacher called Sam Childers, a former drug dealing criminal who undergoes an astonishing transformation and finds an unexpected calling as the savior of thousands of kidnapped and orphaned children in Africa. The true story of one man's battle to save children is in the country of Sudan. With an AK-47 in one hand and a Bible in another hand, Childers has become affectionately known as the machine gun preacher. So we'll be discussing about his life, which could be seen in 2011 movie where Gerard Butler is playing in the same movie called The Machine Gun Preacher. Again, came out in 2011. But for tonight, we'll focus on 2014 documentary made with the same name, where actually you can see the proper machine gun preacher Sam Childers going in Africa, as well as his ministry and life here in the States. Let's start with you, Amber, because we didn't have you on the channel for a while. What did you find most compelling or most effective or most important when it comes to Sam and his life and his ministry?
Oh boy. I really was actually had a difficult time getting through that. I watched the movie and the documentary, and that was rough to get through. And so I think what struck me was how easy it is when you're not in an impossible situation to have a strong opinion about what somebody else is doing in that situation. yeah, I think that would be the thing that struck me the most.
Sean?
Yeah, for me, I was really impressed by the turnaround that Sam had. Um, I and the conviction that he had to help people that were not his own people. Um, and I think that we see this, and especially as Western Christians who have been kind of hedged in by peace, we have these sensibilities that get offended, like, how dare you do that, you know, how dare a man of God go out there with a machine gun, uh, even though he is saving children. And I think we don't see how much this man is like David and how much this man is like Saul or Paul. This is a man of God and a man of war. He's, willing to go out and get his hands dirty in order to bring in the righteousness that God wants. I think it's interesting to me that we as Westerners can almost look down on someone who's out there doing that, and yet we'll sit in a position where we're praying for peace and we're praying for God to move, and then we judge the instruments that he uses to bring about the salvation that he's promising to his people. And I think that that's common all throughout our church history, is we can look at the characters that God uses, and we can condemn them. We can point fingers and say, well, you shouldn't have done it like this or this or this. Meanwhile, we're sitting safely in our own homes. He's the one out there who's risking himself. And I don't necessarily agree with the way that he does everything, but I'm not in that position, right? I'm not the one who has to make those decisions. And I mean, I don't think that it's up for debate that he's making a positive impact in the life of these children. And so, uh, you know, when you have something that is real evil out there, and is harming women and children, and then you have someone like Sam who's going out and he's being the force for good. Sometimes good doesn't look like feeding your enemy. Sometimes good looks like killing your enemy. And that's what Sam embodies. And that is a Christian idea that has been lost, is defending the weak. Yeah, we should help, and we should offer the olive branch, and we should offer gifts and beneficence to the people that we can. But if that's all that we do, then we're just enabling evil. There's a point where a Christian has to stand against evil. And sometimes that looks like doing what Sam's doing.
Yeah, what's interesting is that these people were not even Sam's enemy because they're from Sudan. Like, why would they be his enemy? He's an American, but he opted to go and protect the weak, and by doing that, by believing that this is the mission that God sent him, he was like, well, now if they're killing these little children, and we saw in the documentary, we saw also their online articles and photos of children being mutilated, including their faces. If you love those children, and you're reminded that God made them and that He deeply cares about them, well, if you want to protect them, you can't always say to someone who's trying to harm the weak ones, the defenseless ones, you cannot just stop them with your hand, or just try to communicate with them. Sometimes, unfortunately, force is needed. It's not like he would go there to do that. First, he went, and we'll start dissecting that, in the coming minutes. But he went there for the first time, just minding on his own business, learning stuff. He didn't go there immediately started killing. He started doing it when they start coming after kids. So again, these are not even Sam's enemies. They're coming from different country, different continent, but they became The moment they started killing children in front of his eyes, they became his enemy because he was there passionately defending the weak ones. I just want to say that when I first saw the movie 10 years ago or so, for me as a former pacifist, now I wouldn't know how to classify myself. That movie really bothered me. I was like, but how dares a man in a new covenant, under the new covenant, yet a preacher or a pastor or a priest go and do that, even doing good things? That really confused me. But now, growing, maturing spiritually, mentally, emotionally, all these years, and especially when you guys, both of you, were giving the introductory opinion, I was thinking that God brought Sam literally in this situation because of times in this, as we know the Old Testament passages. Um, God knew he wouldn't be able to use me that way, not because of God, but because of me. He wouldn't be able to use me in that situation to help kids in Sudan in that way, like he used Sam. Since he was a kid, Sam was training with guns. He loved those things. He was prepared for that. And unfortunately, he had a bad childhood. And again, we'll start soon dissecting his life in the documentary. But God, I believe now, use him for times such as this by preparing him, and even using some of the sinful nature or some of the sinful habits that Sam had before coming to Christ. God used all of that experience by baptizing and filtering all of this for Christ. And now, like, oh, now go and use your experience to do good. I'm not saying God literally told him that, but basically, I'm summarizing his calling, his mission. And now go there and protect the weak, the innocent, protect, because as we will soon find out, there are like about 100,000 of people or just children being either mislocated, some of them killed, brutally terrorized. I don't know about the numbers when it comes to rape and stuff like that. So at the end, like you were saying, Shaun, there's only so much that you can achieve if you're just begging for the other party to stop. But if they're not willing to stop, then things like we see in the Old Covenant, but also in Revelation, Jesus will come to deal with his enemies, those who are willingly, intentionally opposing the gospel. And sometimes they oppose the gospel by actually killing his children. So many times we see a war through the new covenant, especially if we're part of the evangelical church, we see there's something evil or Jesus wouldn't do this. He was almost like a hippie guy. But actually, if you see Bible from the beginning to the end, so many things depend on a context that it's like it's impossible to just give an answer that will be black and white to every situation put together as a general answer. No, let's assess every situation differently in their own proper context. And in this cultural, historical context, what has been happening in Sudan for decades, Sam seems like a hero, especially after helping so many families and children. Man, he's their local hero. They love him. They hug him. They can't wait to be adopted. Why? Because his orphanages provide not just food 3 times a day, which their families cannot give them, but also education, and kids can play there. They can pray and learn about God. So his orphanages, they're like safe houses. Any comment on that before we start diving into the documentary? No, Ember agrees. Cool.
Well, I'll comment, I'll say that it's the idea that the orphanages are like safe houses, and that he's out there protecting his, and he's bringing them in and adopting them as children. I mean, that's kind of it's kind of symbolizes the gospel, right? Going out and finding those who are being afflicted, bringing them in, feeding them, taking care of them, and defending them. It reminds me of being translated from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of God's Son, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think that's just it's a really cool representation of that.
Yeah, it's almost like his orphanages are little Edens of garden, and then he goes there and protects and puts them over there, to be protected behind the gates. And now there is the enemies, the chaos. And how do you deal with chaos? Well, with power. So yeah, that's a good comparison. So at the very beginning of this documentary that came out in 2014, again, we see Sam in his raw form. He's not all that preachy. He's not all that. You don't see him as a pastor or priest in some special uniform or even a suit. He's not every word he says is perfectly clean or pure, quote unquote. He is being described by his friends, by his neighbors, and by his family members as intimidating, as violent. He gets jumpy. He threatens people. He's difficult to everyone around him. And his family members say, well, he's also very difficult to himself. And they said that he's actually his own biggest enemy. So that's the very beginning of the documentary. And then we're giving historical context of what has been happening in Sudan since the mid 50s. So in 1955, there's a civil war that divides North from South Sudan. In 1972, peace is negotiated. 1978, oil is discovered, and you can bet whenever oil is discovered or anything very precious in any second or third world country, you can bet that all these wealthy Western countries, they're like vultures all coming after you. 1983, the second war begins. 1997, the LRA, and I hate what LRA stands for because it's such a beautiful name, yet demonically brainwashed people are behind this terrorist organization. LRA basically stands for Lord's Resistance Army. In 1997, because of this terrorist attack, 1.5 million civilians are displaced and 100,000 children abducted. So that's the number that I mentioned about 5 minutes ago, 100,000 people or children. I couldn't remember what actually happened to them. So they're abducted. And in 1998, only a year later, this preacher, Sam, he starts visiting Sudan, and he's seeking for justice. He's armed with a Bible and a gun. Sam is being asked if he's missionary or a mercenary. And then he says to the guy who's interviewing him, he says, I'm both. I'm not giving you this politically correct answer. I'm not telling you just I'm a preacher. You know my life. There's no point of me lying to you. So that's why I like about Sam. You can tell so many bad things about his life, especially before coming to Christ. And even though he's very raw and very in some way unattractive to some people as a pastor or a missionary, but he's very honest with people. He says, "This is who I am." So yeah, he's like, I'm both missionary and a mercenary. Sam has been in many gunfights and he killed people before coming to Christ. He's confronted by the interviewer with God's commandment that says, "You shall not kill." But Sam does something very biblical and says, no, the commandment does not say you should not kill. It says you shall not murder. So he wrecks the interviewer. He says, these are two big differences. Killing is killing, but murder is something that God forbids. But killing is something different. So he says, I'm not murdering people. By protecting the children, I am killing people, but not murdering them. Then Sam asked the main question to the interviewer that I think it's one of the key, not just questions, but points in the whole documentary. He says, if somebody took your child and I'm the one who can rescue your daughter or your son, what would you then say? And they're like, a short silence after that, because that affects you emotionally. Because again, just like Shaun said, very important. It's easy for us to judge when we're sitting in our comfort zones at home and we're like, oh yeah, this guy killed people, he's going to hell. He thinks he's serving God. Well, he's deceived. Well, but is that so? What would you do if your son is abducted or your daughter? What would you do if the authorities, in this case in Sudan, cannot do anything to help find your children? Well, would you hire someone as Sam? And he's not even hired. He's been getting money all from donations or selling his own possessions to go to fund the ministry in Sudan. So if we can maybe start from this historical point, we see what was happening in Sudan, and we see this interview that Sam was having with the interviewer. Amber, would you agree that there's a big difference between you shall not kill and you shall not murder, and also the hypothetical question of well, if someone abducts your kid and I'm the only one who can save them besides God, what would you want me to do? Can we maybe wrestle briefly with these two things?
Okay, I'm not going to address the second question because that's an emotional gotcha that isn't really relevant. If you want to live tyrannized by your emotions and to distort your theology, being tyrannized by your emotionals, what if situations, that's fine. You can do that. I'm not going to engage with that. So I'm going to set that question aside as something that I'm just not interested in engaging with that. I think that the distinction of thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not murder is a lot more complicated and nuanced than they were making it sound like. And I think that is something that until you start to really get a bigger, broader understanding of the Old Testament and Leviticus and Hebrew and some other bigger theologies of life, that is also too small of an argument to actually address the question. Because I think there is a lot to be said for being involved in the taking of life, accident, intentional, either way, that does something to your soul. So, like, if you've been into a car accident that was nobody's fault, but the person in the other vehicle dies, that's still going to harm your soul. So, there's a reason why in the Levitical system, when an animal is brought to be offered to sacrificed, the priest gives the knife to the offerer. The priest doesn't take a life. There is something that happens to you when a life is taken, whether the intention doesn't matter. The distinction of thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not murder has to do with intention. That has to do with the level of damage that you're doing to your own soul. Because there's a difference between the accidental loss of life and the intentional taking and destruction of the image of God that has different weight, I think. And so I really think that there's more nuance and bigger things to wrestle through and questions about the whole situation, because either way, when life is taken, souls are damaged. Whether your intention is good or neutral or evil, when a life is taken, the soul is damaged. And I think that is something that needs to be thought of and considered in the conversation of the level of damage that in all this situation is being done to everyone, to him, to those children, to the rebels, to all the entire situation does soul damage to everybody. And I think that just the argument of killing versus murder is too small of a question. So I think that's what I would say at this point.
Yeah. So for me, I look at scripture and I look at some of the nuance in the Old Testament, right? And Saul has killed his thousands, David is tens of thousands, right? 200 Philistine foreskins, right? I look at that and I'm like, okay, this is a guy after God's own heart. There is a situation in which not only is it called for, but arguably it's a good thing that you remove the enemies of your people, and that you do it with absolute intention to destroy them. And so for me, I would agree with Amber. It's going to change you, but sometimes the way that that changes you, the way that that damages you and breaks you, is not the process of breaking glass, but the process of flint knapping a stone to make it sharp, to make it useful. So yeah, now it's also got to be recognized that David had blood on his hands, and God didn't allow him to build his temple. But we're not all Levites. We're not all of the priest class that aren't supposed to get our hands dirty. We are, as Christians, our job is to not only be those who are praying and helping and taking care of, but our job is also to defend the weak. Right? I mean, that's what a man specifically is called to do. So I think that there is a case to be made where If you see something terrible happening and you had the power to stop it and you don't, you are more culpable for walking away than you would be for getting involved. And if you leave and say, well, I pray that God would do something. I think James condemns that when he says to tell, if you say to your neighbor to be full and be warmed, right, but you don't do anything for him, what have you done? What does it benefit him? It hasn't done anything. And that's in the context of faith without works is dead. I think that there's a point where you've got to put your feet to what you say you believe, and you've got to go out there and do it. Not to detract at all from what Amber was saying, I totally agree that this is something that somebody should have to be aware of. That the process of killing is going to change you, and it's probably not going to change you for what would be perceived as good. If by good, what we mean is able to have this, well, I just have like this blanket love for everybody, and I just want everybody to be happy and saved and all this because yeah, when you develop these kind of soul ties that this is my enemy, you do begin to dehumanize them because that's just that they no longer have that humanness in your eyes. There's something that's expendable. I don't know if that's a. I don't know if that's a. I don't know if we could say that that's a good thing. I mean, obviously, as Christians, we would say that's a bad thing, right? But sometimes it's a bad thing that's useful in the moment. God decreed the complete elimination of people in Joshua, right? That just completely destroy them. Now we know, that's probably effusive language, and we know that we do see those people groups later. And it's just, so yeah, it wasn't maybe a complete destruction, but the command was to destroy them. So there is something that we have to grapple with, that God is capable of commanding the complete and utter destruction of a people group who have sinned so greatly they need to be eliminated. And I can't think of any group more deserving of that than somebody whose express purpose in life is the stealing, trafficking, and raping of children.
Okay, thank you both of you. So yeah, we go back to Sam's life. He was a former drug addict and had a really bad lifestyle. But after Jesus saved him, Sam went on a mission to save the kids. As a child, Sam went to church, which I know surprises a lot of people because how he later turned out in his life, people would not expect that. But yeah, Sam actually grew up in a family of both parents being married, going to church together. He was there every Sunday. So what went wrong? Well, he became rebellious, like many of us in our teen years. He started just playing and trying weed, and then going from there with starting to use some other forms of drugs. He started going to parties, became aggressive. He loved, well, he always loved guns. He started stealing and fighting, and eventually he got so many enemies in Minneapolis who wanted him dead. He didn't know when to stop when he was involved in a confrontation because he always had this high temper. He ended up in a jail. Later, his wife came to God, and Sam was mean and jealous of her walk with God. This is actually what she says in the documentary. But slowly, Sam came back to God as well, and he was reminded of his calling. He knew that God called him to be different and to live his life in a better way. When someone reminded him of this, Sam broke and surrendered. And you can see that when this part of the documentary is happening, that Sam is getting very emotional because he was reminded that there is much more than a life of parties, motorcycle gangs, fighting, stealing, going to jail, abusing drugs, and similar stuff. So he felt something burning in his chest, and he knew that he wanted more than what he had at that moment. A guest preacher from South Africa came to his local church, and when Sam attended the service, this guest preacher gave him a prophecy that Sam was going to Africa and being involved in war. But Sam did not believe nor like the prophecy. And even I didn't take this as in my notes. I remember that Sam was so upset with this prophecy that he planned after the service to confront this preacher and even punch him, because even though Sam came back to Christ, he was still very raw and aggressive person that needed so much refinement as we do. So this was his plan. He was like, "There's no way this prophecy is from God. I don't like this preacher. I don't like this prophecy. I'm going to go and I'm going to punch this preacher so he won't give me any similar prophecy anymore." But Sam said that going to Sudan with a Bible simply wasn't enough. If you went there without a gun, you would have been buried. When Sam came to Africa the first time in 1998, he first started doing a physical work on a roof. And when the trip was almost over, Sam saw a body of a small child whose lower part was gone. And we can see this also in the movie. They did a really brutal yet such a faithful portrayal of a child's body that was missing from, I think it was a bomb or a grenade that fell on him. So there was nothing after his hips down there. There was nothing. Half of the of his body was gone. So Sam prayed and committed himself at that moment to God and said that he will do whatever God needs him to do in order to help the locals. This was the breaking point in Sam's life when he was maybe even reminded of that prophecy that he thought it was false. And just as someone who's curious what's happening in Africa and went there and witnessed the brutality with his own eyes, he probably at that point realized this will be his life and the prophecy was accurate, and that at that point he fully surrendered to God. So it wasn't in the church. It was at this point when he broke by seeing body of a dead child. Amber, I'll stop here because I don't wanna say so much because then we'll forget. So from the point when Sam dedicated his life to the prophecy given, to his first step in African Sudan and witnessing this body of a child that was demolished, destroyed, how can we theologically and emotionally assess Sam's calling, but also his condition? I don't know if I was there and if I would see something like that you only see in war movies or play in war games. At that point, if you really want to follow God and if you really want to obey to what you believe God called you to do, even if you think you can't or don't want to, how difficult it is to reject God if God is your number one in life?
That's a tough question because I think that, boy, I don't really even know how to answer that question because I have questions and I didn't. I don't know. I think God does call us to tough things, and I think that I think sometimes, boy, I need to think about that a little bit more because I'm still. This is one of those things that I'm still wrestling with. That I had a lot of problems with the story in the documentary because I have trouble with that prophecy conflicting from how I see justice and God's avenging evil and the way that that prophecy is worded. I don't think they're in line. And so that causes me to not even know how to answer the question because I question the prophecy itself. So I really struggle. This is one of those things, one of the couple of things that I've really struggled with in this story because we see God's dealing with evil and God's justice is delivered through the agency of the ruling powers, through the agency of the government. The sword and violence is used to confront and stop evil through the army and the government. Vigilantes are rogue in scripture, and they always pay the price for it because it's outside of the way that God works in those in that context. And so to have someone speak on you a prophecy of going rogue, I have an issue with. So I don't know how to answer that question in a way that makes sense because I question the prophecy itself. And I don't want to say like I'm disparaging of what he's doing and judgmental in a negative way on what he's doing. I have questions and I have serious concerns. And I can't, but I'm not omniscient. And I think that when we see, like Shaun brought up, like David and the foreskins, that incident was David trying to win the favor of Saul to marry his daughter. That was not God's justice. And conflating someone's personal agenda with God's dealing with evil creates confusion. And I really want to be careful here to not confuse. I don't like the use of violence at all, and I am a pacifist. But I also don't have a problem with, in a situation where if you're in a compound guarding innocents and you are attacked, defending yourself and them. But when you get into places in that movie, in that documentary, when the action is going outward on the offensive, that's where I struggle and have questions about it crossing the line into vigilantism, and that I don't think is condoned or allowed. And so there's a lot in that gray area there that I struggle with because I don't see the biblical support for vigilantism, but I do see the support for protecting the innocent. So that's kind of where I land, I guess, on that question. I don't know if that even answers your question, but that's kind of where I land.
Yeah, thank you. And if dating includes foreskins, cut me out. I'm gonna become a monk. Okay, Shaun, your turn.
Um, so I'm kind of with Amber on the prophecy. Like to me, the prophecy is I don't even think it was necessary. Honestly, I don't even think it was necessary because I'm somebody who's skeptical of prophecies anyway. Like, oh yeah, somebody came and told me that something was going to happen. That's stupid. Like, I'm going to sit with God and ask like, hey, is this even a thing? Right? Like, I'm going to assume off the bat that it's not accurate. Um, I, I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but I'm just super skeptical of that kind of stuff. So I don't even think that was necessary or helpful. The
Hey, Shaun,
prophecy.
you told us many times you're not sensationalist. So where's
I'm
this
not.
coming from?
I'm not. I'm not a cessationist.
If I would give you a prophecy, would you reject it?
I would bring it to God, right?
Okay, that's good, but you wouldn't reject it from the get-go.
No, but I would be skeptical of it from the get go. Yeah, not
So
not 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 rejecting.
yeah, so so Sam was rejecting the prophecy from the get-go, but like years later and decades after what he went through in Sudan, for him that made perfect sense because everything that he was told to happened to be true. So I'm just saying, don't things like that, like the Bible says not to despise prophecies, deserve to be, questioned, yes, but not like rejected immediately, but like, yeah, you bring it to God and you wait for confirmation, right?
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, it lines up a lot better. But in the moment, I wouldn't have given. I would have been like Sam. I mean, maybe I wouldn't have tried to fight the preacher, but I would have been like, yeah, I don't think you're right on this one. I got nothing to do in Africa. Like, nah. Um, Now, that being said, like, okay. So I I want to agree with Amber about David and the 200 foreskins. I want to agree. So I'm putting that out. I want to agree. But there is a consistent theme in scripture. Yeah, David killed the Philistines, got 200 foreskins. Maybe that wasn't God's justice, but Shamgar killed 800 with the ox goat, and Samson killed 1,000 with a jawbone, and that there were prophecies of battles that they would be running from you, and that you would be killing them as they're going. I think that the concept that we're dealing with, that isn't something that we understand here as Westerners, is that there is the idea that you have the authority, as a nation, as a people, to be free, and they were an occupied nation. This is something that God promised to them, and the Philistines were invaders. They were people who were not supposed to be there, and God had already commanded them to push them all the way out of their limits. Like, bye, get out of here, go away. They didn't want to do that. They chose not to do that. They should have done that. They should have pushed the Philistines out, but they didn't. And so now we have the whole book of Judges, about what are we doing with it? How are we going to deal with this? The idea of vigilantism, when there is no king, when there is no group, no authority able to rule, or when it's so corrupt that it's not able to perform its godly function, then judges rise up. And that's just the biblical narrative. God raises up judges. Now, I think that I wouldn't want to call what Sam's doing, him being like a biblical judge, right? Because I think that's a very high office. But there is like narrative support for something like that happening. And so as a Christian, I would say I just see that this is consistent with the Old Testament. Now with the New Testament, where it's all hippy dippy love and light and all that, I don't know how you fit that in. But if we're taking the whole account, from Genesis to Revelation, I think that you can make sense of it.
Well, and I don't think that it's a binary either or. I think when you're dealing with inside God's plan for justice, that looks consistently one pattern. But I think that where we see the issues, and I think that, Shaun, I'm going to disagree with you here, that most of what you pulled out is not something that I would say falls outside of the pattern enough to what I would think of something as more like vigilante, going rogue on your own plan kind of idea. So I think where we see things like this, and when people like go rogue for their own justice or their own agenda, the one of the most extreme examples is David and Uriah. Like, that's going rogue. you know I, Israel failed and didn't remove from the promised land the taint and the evil that was there. It wasn't necessarily meant to be genocide. It was just, we're pushing out because they're claiming this land for Yahweh. They didn't do it. They left the cancer there. And now we've got all kinds of problems, and we have all kinds of stuff that we have to do to deal with the issue. I think that this is where we get into this idea of intent. And I think that when people go rogue, and sometimes it's well intentioned, sometimes it's not. That's for God to sort out and for God to judge. But when it goes outside of the boundaries that are set, because we have a big, wide field of where the parameters that God sets are, that when you get outside of that big, wide field, cross those fences, that I think is where we get into trouble. I don't think that the end always justifies the means. I think sometimes the we, because we are not, any of us, omniscient enough to know if in my response to the ends justify the means, I don't know all of the fallout from that. I don't know everyone else who's going to be affected from that. I don't know the larger consequences because I did X, Y, and Z, and A, and B, and C happen. So if, you know, in a similar type scenario, you know, if I go out in a vigilante type thing to go bring that justice outside of the compound of defense and go on the offense, that's not going to be responded to with a 50-fold increase in suffering and death in response to what I did that was outside of the plan of the defense of the innocent by me taking upon myself to go out and seek justice that was beyond the bounds of what God allows. And I'm not omniscient enough to know the consequences, the impact of my actions and my decisions if I go rogue. And these are some of those questions that there are not easy, obvious answers to. And we don't know. And we won't know until that final accounting of the decisions and the choices that we make, both individually and corporately, because we don't know. If I had not done this, these 9 bad things would not have happened. And this suffering would not have been 20 times more profound in these people's lives because of what I have done. Like, I can't know that. And so being very careful to weigh this. When is it protecting the innocent and being within God's justice and mercy? And when is it going rogue, taking it upon myself to do what I think is the plan, and I make it a whole lot worse? Whether it's well-intentioned or I just, for whatever reason, not well-intentioned, it could be the most well-intentioned action in the world that has devastating fallout consequences. So I'm just saying there's so much nuance here and so many things at play in the bigger scope of the entire cosmic level of justice and evil and God's overseeing and being sovereign over all of that, that I have no way to know, that I have to be extremely careful in any of those things. That's all I'm saying.
So if I could just respond to that, in a way that I want to receive that, right? Um, but also point out that God loves men of action, and that cowards will not inherit the kingdom of God, and that we aren't tasked with being omniscient, right? Like, God doesn't expect us to be omniscient. I'm not responsible to look 20 years down the line and see what the consequence of the consequence of the consequence of the consequence of the thing that I did would be. Because that's not within my, I'm human. God doesn't expect me to know that. That's something that belongs to him, right? But I am to seek justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with my God, right? That's my job. And so there is a sense in which if I see a wrong, my job is to right it. So I understand, and I want to back you up that we do need to be careful, because we've seen instances where vigilante and somebody who's taking up their, taking this on themselves with good intentions, it goes wrong. I mean, history is replete with instances of people who were very well intentioned that caused great evil. But I think there's also something to be said about this, and maybe it's more me being a young, immature man, that to me that sounds like paralysis by analysis, right? Like, I'm gonna have to sit and think and pray, and by the time I'm done and feel like I'm equipped enough to move, the instance has already passed. Somebody's already been hurt, and I did nothing. Now, I prayed, and maybe there would be some who said, well, that's the most important thing that you can do is you pray. Well, what if somebody else was praying for God to do something? And that's why you were the one who saw the event, and God wanted to use you in that moment, but you just let it pass you by. And so the reason that God didn't answer their prayers was because you didn't move. I I don't know, but can you sympathize with my problem here of like it does sound like paralysis by analysis here.
I'm not saying don't, and I want you to hear me very carefully. I'm not saying there's never a need for an immediate response. I'm saying we have to be so dialed in prayer that those answers are instant. In those situations where I have to make a snap decision, I'm so dialed in prayer that I shoot a prayer to God, help me, what do I do? And the answer is immediate because we're already so deeply dialed into God and such deeply dialed into prayer that we don't have to wait for a week for an answer or the situation that needed an answer 5 days ago. Like, I'm not saying this is a situation where we just do nothing in paralysis because you're worried about everything. No, I'm saying that everything we do has consequences. And that needs to be in this prayer of God, I need wisdom in this situation right now because I need to do what you need me to do and not make things worse by doing it my own way. That needs to be what is taken into account. And because we have to be so dialed into prayer that we are so clear in hearing the voice of the shepherd that it's so we can get that answer quickly when it's needed like that. This isn't I'm going to go sit and fast for a week and wait for an answer for God when I needed it. I needed a decision in 5 minutes. Like, no, like prayer has to be our oxygen. So we're so dialed in those immediate situations. God, help me. I don't have the wisdom for this. What do I do? And we get that quick answer and we act on it. That's what I'm saying.
I really like that. And just to be contentious, I don't think any of us are in prayer as much as Daniel was, and he had to wait 3 weeks.
Okay, I have one situation I want to give an example, and then I want to read Troy's question. So maybe Amber, you will be sensitive by this example, and by giving an example of certain type of animals, I'm not trying to equate the worth of animals with human lives, including terrorists and their souls once when their bodies are killed and their souls go before God. I'm not equating, but I'm saying please hear me out when it comes to the principle and situation. So I happen to know when pest control deals with bugs or with rats, they don't just come in the place that is infected. If they really care about their job, even though they're hard, they go to the very nest. So let's say I know examples like this where rats come in business buildings or in houses. Pest control comes once, twice, or every month, and they keep cleaning, killing rats. But eventually, they multiply so much that it's like, they'll just have to keep coming pest control every month for many years, and still like it's status quo. But if they ever go out to look for the rat's nest and annihilate, kill just all the rats there, then the house will be clean. There will be no danger of any disease being spread through rats, kids being scared, whatnot. And sometimes those rats' nests, and I know a perfect example of this, so I'm not inventing. I know cases of rats' nests that would be invading people's houses would be sometimes in another property belonging to another landlord, another people, but they'll be coming to this house. So the best way to stop the attack would be to go there and attack the nest. And this is coming from a hard person, like a pest control technician. But now we're talking about a person who is only working for God. He's not hired or paid to go protect the kids. So he's protecting kids once, twice, 5 times on the land that belongs to these people. And when that doesn't stop, when he's just defending but attacks keep coming, I'm not trying to defend him. I'm just starting to think what would be for him the best way to at least stop for a season all these attacks. Well, maybe go to the headquarters of this terrorist group and just deal with that. Not because he's vengeful, because this is not them killing Americans. This is not him killing Sam's family. They're killing children. So he's coming as a free man, not as a hard person from pest control. and he's going to attack the headquarters full of militia, not because of hatred, not because of personal agenda, but because he loves kids. I know it's not a perfect example, but in my mind, then this is noble. I just wanted to give this example because it crossed my mind. I'm like, yeah, it's these are rest, these are human souls, even though they're terrorists, they're still made in God's image. God still loves them. But sometimes you can't just defend. The attacks keep coming. If you ever play one of those tower defense video games, you know these attacks will come in waves. You will never end up with them. So that's why I'm thinking then, can this be justifiable if you keep minding your business, defend, but then this is getting worse and kids are being more killed, and adults, but especially kids? Then doesn't it make sense to go and attack the very group, the headquarters, not because of personal hatred, but because you love children so much that that love prevails, and goes above any personal hatred or agenda? And then I'll read a choice question. So does this help? That's how I'm imagining and seeing Sam.
Are you wanting a response to that, or are you just asking the question
Yeah,
to ask
I'm
the
just asking,
question?
would that parallel help you to see that if it's not personal agenda, it is going to deal with someone who keep attacking someone who is innocent and you love them? In that context, wouldn't it make sense to go and just deal with them so that for a season they'll stop attacking the innocent ones, and in this case, kids?
I think again, it's going to come down to, is this going rogue or not? There are times where in the Old Testament, and it's where I go back to because that's where I know, God is established this, and here's the we are going to defend this. And then there are times where God sends people intentionally to deal with, to go out to, like what you're talking about, to deal with the source. But is that the voice of the shepherd telling you now it's time to go deal with the source of the problem? Or is this my fatigue and I can't take it anymore, so I'm going to take it upon myself to go and do this outside of God's telling me to do it? I think that for me is the distinction of where is the line? Is this my fatigue and I can't stand it anymore, so I'm going to go deal with it by myself because I'm not waiting for God? Or is this God telling me to go do it? Like, I think there's a difference that for me is yeah, I think there's just a difference there.
If I can respond to that, because I really like that question. I think that in at least the Western world, we have all agreed that self-defense stops when the aggressor can no longer is no longer a threat, right? So if you're going out and you're going to attack them and they're not actually doing anything harmful at that moment, I think there's a lot of people that would have a problem with that, right? Um, for example, no matter where you stand on the Israel Gaza thing, you hated the fact that food wasn't getting into Gaza. They can be enemies. That's fine. They can be in a war. Feed the people, feed the kids, right? Like, we as Westerners who, I mean, we lost, half of a generation fighting the Nazis when we learned that Eisenhower had camps in which he would put the Nazi POWs and refuse to call them POWs because that required certain needs to be met of theirs. So instead, he called them unarmed enemy combatants, so he could deny them food, water, shelter, and clothing. We get outraged. We're like, that's not okay. You don't do that, because these were already people who had either been captured or surrendered. They're no longer a threat. So I think if we're just thinking from our own sensibilities here, what common sense tells us, as long as they are trying to threaten the innocent, then it's okay to respond, to protect the innocent. If they're not, and you just go and attack them, I think then if you don't have warrant, like Amber said, from God to go and do this thing, You know, in the West, we have a saying, Deus Vult, God wills it. But you know, apart from that, uh, I think that you're probably opening yourself up to problems.
Okay, thank you. Whew. Okay, there are a few questions by Sean. The first one: should we stop evil if it is within our means, and what means are just to use to deal with evil? I believe Ember would say she can write a whole essay on this. It's very hard to give a brief answer. But what will be your brief answer, please, Ember?
Uh, I think that we have seen God do enough things weirdly that as long as it doesn't something if as long as it's not outside of the bounds that God gives us, then we are less likely to be getting ourselves in trouble. I think God did some pretty weird stuff in the Old Testament, especially to deal with situations. I mean, he sent a bug army in the book of Joel, right? He sends an army of locusts. This is the Hebrew word for God's controlling this army of bugs. Like God does some weird stuff to deal with situations. So I think if we can stop it in our means, then if it is not outside of what God is giving us to do, and we're not going rogue on our own power to stop it, then there's a lot of space there. But once you go into going rogue on your own and acting as God instead of for God, then we're just dealing evil.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, God was, or Samuel was God's man, and we watched him, you know, dispatch a king. Uh, like, I think that as long as it's something that God has commanded or has you have reason to believe that this is what He wants, I think that's okay. You know, unless of course you're suffering from some sort of mental illness, and you know, stop it, get help.
Okay, more from Troy. Is there a line that cannot be crossed? Which, in a way, you guys answered, but is there anything extra you would like to add? I know this is a difficult question because I wouldn't know what to say. I mean, and also this some of these lines can be very subjective. Because for me, I could shave Sean's beard, but if he would think it as a sacrilege and he would punch me like Saint Nick punched Area. So it's like some of these things are subjective. I don't know.
I'll go first to let Amber collect her thoughts, just because I'll say something that I know she'll want to respond to. I mean, God did command His people to you know, bash the heads of children against stones, which is something that I would not be okay with. I'm not up for. So to me, that's a line that I wouldn't cross, that God commands in the Old Testament. So I don't know. Um, I don't know if there's an objective line that God would never cross. But there are lines I think that we have as imagers of God that we're like, nah, I can't do that.
Yeah, boy, that specific. Well, that's a tough one. That this is. I think we're getting into the territory of sometimes death is a mercy, and sometimes, like in that particular instance that you're talking about, and I think if I remember correctly, it's Jeremiah. Is it Jeremiah? I can't remember. Or it's Samuel. I think it's Samuel. Dealing with Baal and that whole situation with Elijah. I think that's where that is. Okay, but that is dealing with a culture that is so hardened by evil that there is cannibalism, that there is like these are making people like Nero look like innocent puppy nice people, okay? That sometimes the only way to save a culture is to destroy a culture. And sometimes innocents get caught in that. And while our Western sensitivities get extremely offended by that, most of us don't live in a culture that makes Rome look like a nice place to visit. You know, we don't live in a place where we're competing for the affection and attention and trying to stave off the wrath of demon, hiding as gods that does things like infant sacrifice and cannibalism and things too graphic to describe on something like this, that is so deeply ingrained in a culture that not only tolerates it but perpetuates it and makes it good and celebrates it. And the celebration of horror, that's a line that that releases a mercy. And I think that it's a choice question, and is there a line that cannot be crossed? When you cross that line into doing something that gets into that kind of territory, that is put you on a path to hardening and poisoning your soul to a place where there is nothing left but the release, the mercy of the release of death. That's the line that should not be and cannot be crossed. But where that line is for each person in each situation is not something that we can determine, because it's going to be a different place for everyone, because we all have different vices. We all have different situations. We're all in different places and times and spaces and cultures and fights. So what is a no cross line for me is going to be irrelevant in India or Sudan or South America. Like there's not a blanket one sentence answer for that, really, because that is something that has a lot to do with so many factors that has to be done with that person in deep relationship and connection with God. That I Yeah, like that. I guess that's the best answer I have for that there.
So cannibalism and child sacrifice and the celebration of evil. I want to give you the opportunity to clarify. Are you calling for a scorched earth campaign against Haiti?
Okay, my brother's Haitian,
Oh,
and I
sorry.
know a whole lot about what's going on in that war, and so I'm. Mm, yeah.
I know when the West got involved, we made a lot of things really, really bad. But yeah, I remember, what was it, like a year ago, where they were posting all kinds of things about what was happening there, and I'm sure, like anything else, there's a lot of groups of not good individuals that are terrorizing everyone else. So
Okay, last question, but if we can please answer within a minute because we still have tons of material to cover. Troy is asking you, probably, Amber, what are the indications of going rogue?
I think the short answer for that is when I am at the point where I take it upon myself to act as God instead of for God. That's going rogue. if that makes sense. Troy, if that's a good enough answer or not.
So basically, there is no salvation for Batman. Okay, good to know. I never liked the dude anyway. Okay, I'm gonna share this um comment by Troy, and I'm gonna continue reading from my notes. What happens in the following chapter of Sam's life? So he's in Africa. He sees the body of this dead boy, and now it's time for him to go back to the States. When he goes home, he's never the same. His heart was left in Africa. He couldn't even enjoy hobbies that he enjoyed all his life because he was thinking of Sudanese children suffering and dying. So only 3 months later, Sam went back to Africa. He was helping the locals to find the landmines. So he wasn't even killing anyone. He was just minding his own business, trying to serve the local people. Later, Sam opened a church in the States. He built it and even preached in it. But Sam knew that there was more, so he started a mobile clinic in Africa. He raised the funds for it. An unknown God sent man financed the majority of the expense. Sam knew he would help the SPLA, which is the organization called Sudan People's Liberation Army. Um, he heard all the evil coming from the opposing terrorist organization, Lord's Resistance Army, or LRA, and their leader, a madman, Joseph Kony. His campaign was the one of fear, and he and his people stole tens of thousands of children at night. He has hurt and mutilated many children over the years. Many of these children saw their parents being murdered. Sam has taken them into his home and treated them as his own children. Per Sam's his own words, it is not Joseph Kony who is the biggest problem, but Omar Hassan Ahmad al-Bashir, who is the president of Northern Sudan. He's the one fueling and financing all the crimes against humanity. Per latest information, which was not in documentary, I saw this on Google, he was ousted in a military coup in April 2019 and is currently being held at a military hospital in a town due to the ongoing civil war in the country. At the end of year 2000, God told Sam to temporarily stop with his current project or mission and to start the Children Village, which is basically an orphanage. So Sam sold his business in the States and he traveled with his wife as a traveling preacher to raise money for Africa. During the building process, Sam took his wife to Africa for the first time ever to show her the project while, while the terrorists were bombing them. At the orphanage, kids love Sam, and you can see these photos, you can see videos. They're all hugging him. He's playing soccer with them and whatnot. They hold their Bibles and sing songs. They can finally eat 3 meals a day and they can play. They have more than their families could provide for them. Kids were connected and unified with each other and God. There was peace and joy. There were times when Sam and his wife couldn't afford for basic bills. Their truck was repossessed. Sam would sometimes buy one-way tickets to Africa, not even knowing when and if he would be able to come back to the States. They were foreclosing on the house in the States. All they had were 2,000 and some little over that amount of money on his bank account. Yet Sam still decided to send that amount to Africa. They had new orphans and the ministry needed more funds. People and kids didn't even have the clean water, and we saw in the videos that they were drinking from those dirty, muddy, little lakes of water, whatever they are, like something they would just find here and there that they would be able to drink. And that water was brown completely, and that's what the kids would be drinking. So Sam had so much compassion because of the food shortage, clean water shortage, not to even mention medication and stuff like that. So he sent the last money he had to the ever growing number of the new orphans, whose many times both parents would be killed. Some of the families that we see in the documentary, they're so poor that they were collecting food from the market's ground in order to survive. This food would be many times mixed with dirt, and this is what parents and children would be eating. There were times where Sam's extended family did not know if Sam would even come back from Africa. Sam almost lost his wife because of this, and they literally lost their son, who I think overdosed. So Sam went back to Africa after a while because his whole life was just crushing. A month later, he came back to the States, so he was traveling very frequently. But his wife was mentally, emotionally snapped and spaced out because first they lost their son, and second, instead of Sam standing being there with his wife, he went back to Africa. So she was lost mentally. She was not okay. She was just looking almost like through him and not pay attention to him. And there was nothing in her eyes, in her face. She was like a walking zombie. Not to sound disrespectful, but she was really changed. Then Sam decided to go back to Africa instead of staying with her, unfortunately. And his wife told him that it was a good idea since she did not love him anymore. Upon his return, Sam did everything crazy in Sudan to die. And most likely, I just want to say, because it makes sense, he did this because of the pain he was carrying, because of their dead son, and because of his wife telling him she doesn't love him anymore. So Sam even tried to get killed because probably of that pain that he was carrying in his chest. So he wanted to be that to die. He was reckless. He wasn't so much careful when he would deal the militia, the terrorists. He was looking for that, but God did not allow him to die. Sam did not plan to return to the States. His daughter and wife, however, stayed there. His daughter even said that she hated him and told him that he loved African kids more than his own daughter and wife. And when Sam was saying this, he broke. And then we see the image when his daughter is getting married, and he comes back to the States to escort her and walk her to the aisle. And he's weeping there, being proud of his daughter. And we see the moment where Sam, his wife, and their daughter are being reconciled, all through that gap that the death of their son made, and because Sam didn't stay there to grieve with his wife. I'll stop here and then continue to the rest of the documentary, because I want us to analyze not just children's death, not just orphanage, but man, this needs so much wisdom. Like how to deal with ministry on one hand and family on the other hand. Something will suffer. There'll be children dying and being hungry on one hand. On the other hand, your literal biological son died, and your wife is like a walking zombie. She needs your husband's support. She needs your love. She needs you to hug her and tell her everything will be okay. How to juggle with this, how to deal with this, I wouldn't know. I don't have enough wisdom. On one hand, you're like dying inside of you because your son died, and you see your wife not caring about you because you don't care about her. On the other hand, you know that day after day more Sudanese children are dying, but also adults, not just from terrorist attacks, but from the shortage of clean water and food, from starvation. How even to deal with this horrible dilemma, what to do, how to do, when to do, with who to do. Unfortunately, Sam's way of dealing with problems was just running away frequently from the States to Africa, but that did not help his family. And I'm speaking not this judgmentally at all, because I wouldn't know how to deal with this. Because whatever you decide, you feel like someone else will suffer. And this will be like the only two options he had. So Amber, we can maybe start with you. I won't even ask you to put yourself in his wife's shoes, because that will not be fair to you. But can you please share some wisdom from a side of a woman that maybe Shaun and I don't have? What was, in your understanding, what would be the wisest thing that in this season of life, when everything was collapsing and their son died, what would be maybe the wisest and most compassionate move for Sam to do in this chapter of his life?
Well, I don't know, because I don't talk about this very often. But I don't know if you guys know this, but my parents, my whole life, were a ministry team, and now they are missionaries in Africa. When they retired from full time ministry, they became missionaries. So I have some experience living through this. Um, and I this is where it gets very, very difficult for ministry families, because on the one hand, you're called to care for your family, and on the other hand, you're called to sacrifice everything for God. And Christ even talks about, you know, his coming is going to make divisions, and even in families. And I, I can definitely sympathize with both his kid and his wife, because there are times where you're left standing there saying, why are you going back to Africa when you're going to miss your own granddaughter's graduation? What is so important that you can't wait a week? Why are you doing XYZ at the expense and the cost of your own family? And I don't have any wisdom other than to say that these families all need a lot of support and prayer, because these are very difficult challenges to navigate, and these can leave a lot of a lot of soul wounds. Nobody gets out of this without soul wounds, and those need properly cared for, and if they're not, they will destroy you. And so yeah, that's all I think all I have to say on that.
Yeah, I think, as you know, just a dude. I think it might be different for people who are called, you know, to the specific roles. But for the average person, the way that we navigate this is that we have rightly ordered loves, right? You know, you love God chief among, or you know, before all things, and then you love your wife and your children, and then your neighbor, and then everybody else. And so, as long as you're ordering your loves appropriately, then you're not going to run into these kinds of problems. Now, obviously, for the people who are called to go and do these things, it's going to be different. But you know, for the rest of us, you know, Tom, Dick, and Harry Christian, you gotta just be you gotta be intentional in the way that you structure your life so that things don't get out of whack. Because I mean, your children and your wife, in that instance, would have a very legitimate grievance against you that you're going out and you're doing these things, and yeah, they're really good things that you're doing, but they're less good than loving your wife and loving your children. Not not because they're not good in and of themselves, but because your responsibility is first to your house and then to the rest of the world.
Okay, we're almost done. I just want to say that through his charity, which Sam Tile named Angels of East Africa, Sam and his team has built 7 orphanages, 7 schools, and around 50 wells for clean drinking water. Praise God. And a farm where he teaches those displaced by war how to make a living. So he's doing so many good things. It's not just defending them, literally not to die, but also providing education, spiritual life, roof over their heads, food, uh, giving them skills when they grow up, how to honestly make for their life. And again, in the documentary, you can see kids eating, even though it's nothing fancy, but still eating 3 times a day. They're provide the basic educational skills so they can learn how to read, how to spell, how to do these things. And they live a very happy and joyful life. You can also see this in the video. They feel safe. They feel, as again, this is their safe haven. They can play safely without thinking, will a bullet come through the wall and maybe hurt them? Um, when all of this was done, the movie opportunity came to Sam. Sam thought he couldn't be getting church or preaching invitations anymore if he would share with the whole world honestly who he is and what he has done in Sudan. So this was his concern. He says, "Man, if we make the movie, then people will get to know who I am, and maybe I won't be getting any more church or even preaching invitations anymore." But of course, as we know, that did not happen. Maybe in some churches he wasn't called to preach anymore, and we understand that. But at least not all doors closed to him, because as we know, after this movie came out and the documentary, but even when the documentary was ending, we see some of his friends and coworkers still describing Sam as, kind of mean, violent. Some people would even hate him. He's still intimidating. He's relentless. I'm quoting all of this. He's difficult to everyone, including himself, etc. Moreover, he's called a freedom fighter because he fought for freedom. He's literally admired in Africa, but people believe his heart is in the right spot. So regardless of all the bloodshed, regardless of all his raw character, he's loved and deeply admired in Sudan. The way the children accepted him, played with him, and the way they love him and hug him is really something special. When you saw those last minutes of the documentary, I don't know about you two guys, but for me, it made me emotional because, oh my God, just just the last few minutes, the last 5 minutes of the documentary, those precious children's arms hugging Sam, playing with him, being so happy they have roof over their head, being able to eat. Oh my God, I'm like, it's impossible for you not to get emotional. It's impossible. Especially how they see him almost as their dad, how they, how he's part of the family. And to some orphans, he's literally the only dad they have in their lives. And just to be reminded, he's the one fighting not for himself but for them, for others. That's why he's called the God's man for the hour, and that's the end quote. I literally took that from the documentary. The concluding message from Sam is that, and this is where he started crying by the end of the documentary. He says that Americans watching either the documentary or the movie with Gerard Butler about his life would not. He prayers that us as audience watching the documentary or the movie, that we would not forget people and children suffering and starving in Sudan. His ministry expanded from Sudan to Uganda and Ethiopia, and his wife is now helping him. At the end, Sam is asking the question if it is right to use the gun as a man of faith, and he responds to it positively. His philosophy is not to abandon guns just because you go to pray, but after you pray, to go with your prayer, Bible, and gun in another hand. And this is the end of the documentary. Again, for some people, it could be controversial one, like it was for me a decade ago. I still don't have all the answers, just like you guys, just like you, Amber, said. Some things are so difficult to judge and assess because it's not so black and white. We're not in his shoes. He sacrificed a lot. He believed this was the prophecy. This was the ministry and the mission God gave him and God put him under. He may not be proud of everything he went through his life, and well, for sure I can say that, because otherwise he wouldn't be crying for when he was speaking about some instances in his life throughout the documentary. But at least there's a happy end when it comes to this documentary. Many children are safe. We saw one boy whose eye was just, well, he's left without one eye, and he somehow, after having surgery, patched with something, and he's there still being happy with Sam in an orphanage. So we see that God, throughout whatever means, good or bad, being done over there in Sudan, that God can now raise a new generation of family, of children. They're feeling safe, feeling grateful, being raised under the banner of Bible, prayer, respecting authorities, being joyful, not feeling unsafe from all the bullets, and having skills growing up and learning how to do different trades and having their own family. So I think a lot of good came out of this, even though we wouldn't necessarily justify every means or every detail of his life. So yeah, that's basically the life of Sam Childers. You can find his both movie and documentary online. I wanted to read some stuff, some details from an article I prepared, but we're already hour and a half, so I'll stop here. But I'll leave this link. It's in the video description. It gives so many details, including the guy who's on the opposite side, Joseph, how he was actually an altar boy in a church, and how he was brainwashed to lead this religious militia that will turn out to be a terrorist one. And the way that they were attacking other Sudanese was all because they were brainwashed. So there are a lot of details that we don't see necessarily in the movie or in the documentary, but these are extra sources that I think help us to see many other characters, not just Sam and his life. And also in this article, the lady who is the author of the article, she says, after the movie, all I could think of were the questions of conscience that confronted the fictional Jesuits in The Mission movie, the real life Lutheran theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Salvadorian Archbishop Oscar Romero when they were faced with unspeakable crimes against humanity. I think a review of the dilemmas these good men faced is critical to evaluating Machine Gun Preacher. Then she's giving more examples. It's a really lengthy and really thorough and theological article. I would encourage people to read. It can help them wrestle with this tough question and dilemma. And she's ending one of the subchapters in her article by saying this. Now, in Machine Gun Preacher movie, the audience is carried along by Sam's story right up until he faces a decision that seems to conflict with his Christian beliefs about peace over violence. And we are challenged to side with Sam when he makes the decision to fight with guns, to fight guns with guns, violence with violence in the war for the soul of Sudan and its children, something that no one else seems to know or care about. And then she talks about Sam Chiller's dilemma. It's a really beautiful but long article, so I just leave it for the audience in the link. But yeah, we came to the concluding point because we don't want to go for too long. But yeah, any concluding thoughts and anything that we didn't mention, but you guys thought it is worth mentioning or maybe even clarifying after watching both the movie and the documentary?
I think I would say I would say that this would be a good example of not limiting who God can use to do the work he has for someone because of your own set of what is acceptable and what is not.
Learning about Sam and watching the movie and the documentary, one thing that impacted me was that his story had some similarities with one of my heroes, which is, I don't know if you've heard of him, John Brown, who he sparked the American Civil War. He was a freedom fighter for the abolition of slavery. Um, he's a very controversial figure, but he was a very pious man. He was he was committed to his Christian faith, and it was his Christian faith that told him that slavery was wrong. And so he went around, moved around the country in order to make certain friendships with people like Frederick Douglass and some other abolitionists. And then he ultimately paid the price of his life and the life of his children in order to see slavery abolished. And just not even a decade after his death, um, the Civil War kicked off, and the Union Army would march into battle with his name on their lips. And so, if anyone hasn't heard of John Brown, I really recommend you looking into his life. He was probably one of the most influential figures in American history that a lot of people don't know about.
Okay, well, I'm glad we managed to make an episode within an hour and a half. I just want to thank everyone for your kind comments. Thank you, Troy, for the donation. Thank you all for your attention. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. It means a lot to us and to me. Also, this coming Sunday in a week, I'm having a guest who will join me in tackling this difficult and very interesting topic of the identity of Satan, who he is, how he was called. We'll go a little bit into etymology, phrases, stuff like that. And Friday, most probably, Shaun and I will talk about the Gospel of Nicodemus. If he agrees, that's probably the topic that we'll do this Friday. So thank you for your time. I would still encourage you to check the movie, The Machine Gun Preacher. If you haven't, check the documentary, check the article I mentioned in the video description, and just wrestle with this tough topic with God. Just asking questions, studying the Bible, pray about it, because you never know if, God forbid, something in your life can happen that you don't know. It's not so easy. It's not so black and white, but you're called to make a big decision. So, um, Anthony, God bless. So yeah, I just want to bless everyone and say thanks for your time. So yeah, we'll see you Friday with Shaun and the Gospel of Nicodemus, and Sunday on the topic of Satan. Thank you, Ember, and thank you, Shaun, and God bless.